Welcome back to TechniqueWOD. My name is Doug Larson with the Barbell Shrugged Podcast. You can go to barbellshrugged.com to check out the podcast and the rest of the TechniqueWOD episodes. Today we're going to talk about deadlifts and all the different variations of deadlifts that you can do, the benefits of each, and techniques for all of it. So first, let's go over a regular deadlift and talk about technique points both from the front and from the side. So whenever you're coaching or videoing yourself from the front and from the side, those are the best positions where you're going to get a good angle where you can really see if you're doing it correctly. If you're a little more experienced, getting this kind of angled view right now, the same view that you're looking at through the camera right now, can be beneficial, but if you're really wanting to check out someone's knee position or someone's back position, being right on the front or right on the side is ideal. So go ahead and come right to the front right now, Chris. So from the front, technique-wise, I like to have my feet about hip width apart, where my legs are 100% totally vertical, and then maybe widen up a little bit. So it's not really hip width, not really shoulder width, it's kind of in between hip and shoulder width apart. That's where it's comfortable for me, and my feet for the most part are almost all the way straight ahead. As I go down, my knees go out, my back stays straight, and I'm gonna grab right outside of my shins, shoulders back. I'm gonna keep my knees out as I squeeze my butt and pull the weight from the floor. As I pass the knee, I'll bring my hips forward. So really the benefit from the front is mostly knee position and foot position. I can see if I'm like this, if my arms are too close together, which is a common problem. For me, with my leverages, I walk up all the way to the bar where there's no space here. Walk up all the way to the bar, I keep that vertical shin, butt back, and then I bend my knees. Shoulders together, I drive through the floor until I pass my knee, and now my hips come forward and my shoulders go back. From the side again, you see I walk all the way up to the bar. I keep a neutral spine, ribs down. I bend at the hip, again, as far as I can with a neutral spine, and then I can start bending my knee. And then I can start bending my knee until I get to the bar. Shoulders back. I keep that vertical shin, I drive through the floor. Then once I pass the knee, my hips come forward, I squeeze my butt and I pull my shoulders back. I'm not leaning back, I'm squeezing my butt and I'm standing as tall as I can. What's really common is that people finish like this with their shoulders forward, or they don't squeeze their butt and they end up like this. Okay, where they're hyperextending their low back and their knees are locked. You don't want your knees to be locked. You can have a soft knee, which means a straight knee, but it's not locked. And then you squeeze your butt and that pulls you out of that hyperextended position. Okay? So, in case the bumper plate was in the way, I don't want my knee to be locked and me to be hyperextended like this. I want to have a straight knee, my butt squeezed, and I'm just standing as tall as I can with my shoulders back. Okay? So that's basic points on how to deadlift. There's many different types of deadlifts. A lot of people don't have the mobility to do a regular deadlift with a straight bar off the floor. So there's a bunch of other options that we have. So probably my favorite option for brand new people is to teach them how to do a hex bar or a trap bar deadlift. This is a hex bar. You stand inside of it. That way the bar, isn't running into your shins. You don't have to account for the bar path, okay? Which means it'll be kind of in between a squat and a deadlift. It's the same thing. I bend over as far as I can with a straight back. Then I can bend my knees. And in this case, I can have a little more of a forward shin angle because the bar is not running into my shin. So it can be in between a squat and a deadlift. It looks like this. So that's a hex bar deadlift. Same rules apply. Same rules apply if you watch from the front. Same rules apply if you watch from the front. My feet are pretty much straight ahead. I stand right in the middle. Knees go out. Shoulders back. Just like this. So that's a hex bar deadlift. You can see the handles are a little bit higher. So I'm not all the way down, so to speak, like I would be with a regular bar. I can start a little bit higher, which means I don't have to have as much mobility. If I get a little more mobility, I can just flip it over and I can grab the other handles. I can grab the other handles, and now at the squat, a little bit lower. Again, it's kind of in between a squat and a deadlift. A little more quad, a little less hips, glutes and hamstrings, if you will, because you'll be a little more vertical with your torso, not quite so bent over. So that's where I like to start. From there, I like to progress. Again, that's where I like to start with new people or people that don't have very much mobility and been doing deadlifts incorrectly for trying to relearn. So from there, I like to either go to one of two things. I like to go to a rack pull, or I like to go to a sumo deadlift. We're gonna go over each one right now. Might be easier for you to come out here and film me from the front. So using these hooks that you can buy at Rogue, you can elevate the bar to whatever height you want. So instead of the bar starting mid-shin, it can start, in this case, just below my knee. I don't need as much mobility to get into a good position. So I can come up to the bar, again, I can push my butt back, grab right outside my legs, and then I can just squeeze and come up right from there. I'm doing a rack pull is what I'm doing. I'm basically just doing a rack pull, and the reason I'm doing it in this case isn't necessarily to load up 130% of my deadlift max. What I'm doing here is I'm showing you a scaled deadlift for people that don't have adequate mobility to keep a neutral spine. So if you see someone go down to get a bar and they go, and they're about right here, you don't want to deadlift that person from the floor, especially in a Metcon when they're fatigued and they're tired. Maybe you can get them into a position where they're really straining, where it doesn't look horrible, it looks maybe okay. Once that person gets tired, their back's going to round, and eventually they're going to hurt their back. Even if it's not that day, it'll happen eventually. Stress is cumulative. He can put the stress on his back that day, and then hurt his back getting in and out of his car, a week from now. So you don't want to put that person in that position. What you want to do is test them. You can put your hand on their back, or have them put their hand on their back, and then they can go down, bending at the hip first, and then go and reach for the bar. And if they start to round right here, well, that's as high as they want to go. That means the bar is going to be about right here. That's maybe 4 or 5 inches above where the bar is off the ground. So you can put them on an elevated platform and they can pull a deadlift safely. They'll get stronger. They'll have almost the same amount of strength benefit, but they won't have nearly as much risk because they're not rounding their back. So a rack pull is a great option. And again, you can start them above the knee if you want and then move them down. As they gain more mobility, either in their ankles or hips or thoracic spine or wherever they need more mobility, and that's a whole different issue, testing where you need mobility. Well, you can start high and then you can work your way lower and lower and lower until you're eventually on the ground. Okay? The other option is to do a sumo deadlift. So a sumo deadlift is where I have wide feet and my hands are on the inside of my feet. My feet are, for the most part, pretty straight ahead. I like to toe out about 10 degrees. Same thing. I'm going to have my knees go out, back stay straight. It looks just like this. So what you'll find is that people that can't keep a neutral spine on a regular deadlift tend to do better on a sumo deadlift. So if I look like this, if I go down and I end up like this, maybe on a sumo deadlift, I go down and I'm a little bit better. I didn't gain any mobility. It just put me in a position that was easier to achieve, and now I can pull a deadlift a little more safely. I'm not quite as bent over. I'm a little more vertical with my torso. If you look at studies on deadlifts and shear forces on your spine, hex bar deadlifts tend to have the least amount of shear force on your low back, and then sumos and then regular conventional deadlifts have the most shear force. Doesn't mean they're not safe at all. It means that you want to pick the variation that's right for you with your level of experience and your level of mobility. You always want to do it correctly. So, from the side, the sumo deadlift looks just like this. Again, wide feet, knees out. I keep my back flat until I can't bend over at the hip any further, and then I can start bending my knees. As I bend my knees, I push them out. My back angle stays the same. Once I pass the knee, my hips come forward, my shoulders go back. I stand as tall as I can. And then on the way down, I bend at the hip. So I pass my knee and then I bend my knees. My knees go out. I go up and down the exact same way. If I pull from the floor in a perfect position, I go down in that same perfect position. So a sumo deadlift is a good variation. From there, kind of a middle of the road, well, I'll keep here. From a middle of the road variation is just a regular deadlift. So the same deadlift I showed at the very beginning, feet hip width apart, bending at the hip, then I bend my knees. If I want, I can alternate my grip. If it's heavy, keep that vertical shin as long as I can, butt down. Once I pass the knee, hips come forward, shoulders go back. Bend at the hip, pass the knee, and then I can bend my knees. Or if it's really heavy, you can just drop it. So that's really kind of a middle of the road variation. From there, you have a bunch of other options. Generally, more mobility and lower bar positions are harder to achieve. I forgot what I just said. Things that require more mobility. And generally, those positions that require more mobility are positions where you're pulling from lower on your body, where you're either doing something like a snatch grip deadlift, where I might be here and I'm going to grab wide like I would on my snatch. So I bend at the hip and I keep going lower and lower and lower, and I'm grabbing wide, okay, just like I would on a snatch. And so my hips can be a little higher because I'm just doing a deadlift. I press, and then when I pass my hips, I stand all the way up, bend at the hip, and then bend my knees. From the front it looks the exact same way. Knees out. Okay. My hips are a little bit above my knees, so I'm not in a snatch position specifically. I'm in a deadlift position just with a wide grip. Drive my heels through the floor. Once I pass my knee, squeeze my butt, pull my shoulders back, and I stand up normal. So a snatch grip deadlift is slightly different than a snatch deadlift. The difference is that I'm doing a deadlift with a snatch grip, as opposed to doing a snatch first pull and transition with a very heavy weight. So to see what that looks like, a snatch grip deadlift looks like this. I'm deadlifting with a wide grip. My hips are high. I'm bent over. I drive, and then I just stand up normal and squeeze my butt. Whereas a snatch deadlift, if you're a weightlifter, my feet might be a little wider. I'm pushing my knees out. My butt is lower, and then I'm doing a first pull where I'm here, and then I'm transitioning or I'm pushing my knees under the bar. It's connecting with my hips. From this point, I would usually try to extend, shrug, and catch the weight overhead. Okay? So I'm putting myself in a position, in that power position right here, where I can now jump and shrug and catch the weight over my head. So a snatch grip deadlift is a deadlift. Snatch deadlift is an Olympic movement where you're mimicking the snatch, but you're kind of just stopping halfway once you've transitioned and you're in that power position. Okay? So you can see, having that wider grip requires me to get lower. I need more mobility. A lot of people can't get into a good position. You tell them to do a snatch grip deadlift, and they go like this. They get here, and then you see they're like this, and they can't get into a good position. So that's not a good variation for a lot of people, just because they just don't have the mobility for it. Can't get into a good position. So that's why it's one of the harder variations. Another one of the harder variations is simply to elevate your feet. This is called a deficit deadlift. So you can see the bar, instead of standing right here, is starting lower on my body. Again, the lower I go, the more likely it is that I'm not going to be able to keep a neutral spine. So I bend at the hip, and then I start bending my knees. My butt goes lower. I grab right outside my shins, knees out, and then I do a deadlift from here. I pass the knee, hips come forward, and I lock out at the very top, shoulders back, butt squeeze. Same thing on the way down. I bend at the hip, and then I can bend the knees. So you can see, it's harder to get so low and keep a neutral spine. I might just be starting to round right now. Butt up, back flat. Keep that angle until you pass the knee. Hips come forward, shoulders go back, stand tall. So a deficit deadlift is definitely one of the harder variations, probably the hardest variation. As Chris Moore mentioned in the podcast, getting a little lightheaded. As Chris Moore mentioned in the podcast, is a deficit deadlift with a wide grip. I'm doing a deficit snatch grip deadlift. So I'm here, I'm bending at the hip, bending my knees, grabbing as wide as I can. For me, this is probably way too low. So I'm here, my hips are super low because I can't keep a neutral spine otherwise. I come here, I deadlift all the way to the top. For me, my normal compensation when I get too low isn't that I round my back, it's that I usually destabilize my shoulders, my scapula rolls forward, and I get out of position with my shoulders, especially on heavy things like rack pulls. A rack pull above the knee for a guy with my leverages where I'm way stronger at the top, I could probably do 200 pounds over my max. So if I pull 600 for a set of 3 on rack pulls, my compensation isn't necessarily to round my back, it's that my shoulders will come forward and I'll pull like this. I used to do that a lot when I was younger, when I thought rack pulls were really cool, even though they never really seemed to improve my actual deadlift 1 rep max, because the top of the move is never really where I needed a lot of help. So anyway. I'm sorry?
Stiff leg deadlifts?
Yeah, we can talk about that too. A stiff leg deadlift is what Chris was just mentioning. A stiff leg deadlift or an RDL is a great variation, especially if you're a person that does have a range of motion problem and you don't like pulling from the floor. What you can do instead is start the bar. What you can do instead is start the bar on an elevated surface. You can start the bar somewhere higher and then you can do an RDL. So it looks like this. I can do a deadlift from a safe position here, take a step back, and then I can bend at the hip, get a big stretch in my hamstrings, and then come back up. So my knee angle isn't changing. So my knee angle is not changing at all. It's all hips. Getting a big stretch in my hamstrings, squeezing my glutes, and driving through the floor, all hips, and no knee extension at all. So your quads are more or less taken out of it, and a great movement, especially if you're a person that has, like a sprained ankle or something. If you can't bend your ankle, for front squats or whatnot, you can pull from a high position like this, and then you can RDL, and your ankle doesn't really move that much. If you can support a load but you can't bend it, it's a good way to still get a good amount of strength training, keep your hips strong while you're rehabbing your ankle. We do that all the time here at Faction. So,
mention to them that RDL stands for Romanian deadlift and it's the same as a stiff leg.
That's a very good point. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. A stiff leg deadlift is the same as an RDL. An RDL stands for Romanian deadlift. Sometimes people use them interchangeably. Sometimes they mean stiff leg deadlift. They mean you're going to round your back during the movement like this. Which is probably never a good idea, so don't do that ever. If you have a hurt back, deadlifts are not the end-all be-all of strength training. They're a beneficial movement, but if you already have a hurt back, it's okay to, for a while, get away from deadlifts, do more single leg work, do more vertical type bilateral squatting, front squats, back squats, and overhead squats, especially Olympic style where you're more upright and you're not so bent over. Let your back heal up. Once it's 100% healed, then you can start progressing back into deadlifts using the progression we talked about earlier. Probably starting with something like a trap bar with less shear force, and then moving on to a sumo deadlift, and then onto a regular deadlift, and then eventually maybe to heavier pulls like heavy rack pulls and what have you. So wrap it up for today. If you have more questions about deadlifting, always you can go to barbellshrugged.com and click the Ask a Question tab at the top of the page, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter, and we can answer your question another day.